It started as a whisper I wasn't supposed to hear, and became the one thing I could never forget. It started like any ordinary evening, soft music humming from the living room, the faint aroma of roasted herbs drifting from the kitchen, and the quiet warmth of laughter weaving through it all. He had come over to help his friend's mother set up for a small weekend gathering. Just neighbors, old friends, familiar faces. Nothing out of place. Until she walked in. She wasn't loud or demanding attention. In fact, she entered almost unnoticed, but somehow, the air changed. The room seemed to bend slightly toward her. Her voice was calm, low, with a kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself. Her presence wasn't about beauty in the obvious sense, though she was beautiful. It was about how she carried herself, unhurried and self-assured, like a woman who had already seen enough of the world to not chase anyone's approval. He found himself watching her without meaning to. The way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear as she greeted people, the small laugh that seemed to reveal a private world, the faint trace of citrus perfume that followed when she moved past him to pour a drink. Every gesture felt deliberate, graceful, quiet, yet strangely magnetic. Later that evening, conversation filled the table. The room buzzed with the easy comfort of old friends, stories overlapping, glasses clinking. He sat near her, close enough to catch the glint of her earrings when she turned her head. At one point, a teasing remark passed through the group, light-hearted, something about age and youth, about the charm of younger company. Laughter broke out, but she didn't laugh. Instead, she leaned slightly toward him, her shoulder brushing his. Her voice dropped low enough that only he could hear. "Careful, no one will believe you anyway." The words were soft, almost playful, yet something in her tone didn't match the smile she wore. It was layered, half warning, half dare. For a heartbeat, he couldn't tell if she was teasing him or testing him. The sound of her whisper lingered long after she leaned back and joined the laughter again. He tried to focus on the rest of the evening, but her words stayed. The warmth of her arm, the scent of her hair, the way her eyes flicked toward him every now and then, it all became too vivid to ignore. When he finally left that night, the echo of her voice followed him out the door, quiet and haunting. "No one will believe you anyway." He didn't understand what she meant, not yet. But deep down, he knew one thing for sure. Something had just begun, and nothing about it felt ordinary anymore. The days after the gathering passed in a blur, yet her whisper refused to fade. It replayed at the quietest moments, while he brewed his morning coffee, while his phone buzzed with meaningless notifications, even when he tried to sleep. There was something in her tone that felt both dangerous and deeply human, like she had revealed more than she intended. He told himself it had been nothing, just a passing tease. But then he saw her again. It was at the local market on a late Sunday morning. The sun was warm, the air filled with the scent of fresh bread and oranges. She stood at the flower stall, dressed in a soft beige coat, her hair tied loosely behind her neck. When she noticed him, her lips curved into a faint smile, polite, knowing, yet not surprised. "Running errands?" she asked, her voice steady as always. He nodded, trying to sound casual. "Yeah. Didn't expect to see you here." "Life's full of small coincidences," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Or maybe not so small." There it was again, that subtle weight beneath her words, something unspoken that made his heart race before his mind could catch up. They talked about simple things, her work, his studies, a local cafe that had just opened nearby. But underneath it all was an invisible rhythm, a quiet pull that neither of them acknowledged. When she laughed, it wasn't loud, it was restrained, like she was careful not to let too much slip. And yet, her eyes kept finding his, holding just a second longer than they should. He noticed how her hand brushed his sleeve when she passed him a bag of fruit, how her perfume, soft and citrus with something warmer beneath, seemed to linger in the air between them. It was nothing, and somehow, everything. When they finally parted ways, she gave a small nod and said, "Take care." But the way she said it, almost like a promise, almost like a warning, left him standing there long after she walked away. That evening, he caught himself glancing at his phone, expecting a message that would never come. He tried to focus on work, but every sound, every passing memory of her laugh, tugged at his attention. He didn't know what was happening, only that something invisible had begun weaving itself between them. A quiet thread, fragile yet impossible to ignore. And as much as he wanted to dismiss it, he knew that the next time their eyes met, pretending not to feel it would be impossible, IT happened on a Thursday evening, one of those in-between nights when the world feels heavy with the promise of rain. He had dropped by his friend's house to return a borrowed book, not realizing she would be there too. She was helping with something in the garden, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned loosely, the kind of effortless beauty that comes from not trying to impress anyone. He was about to leave when the first drops began to fall. A slow drizzle at first, then sudden sheets of rain pouring down. His friend had gone inside, but she stayed on the porch, watching the downpour with an almost nostalgic expression. He hesitated, then joined her. "Guess we are trapped," he said lightly. She smiled without turning to him. "Seems the sky has its own plans." For a moment, they just stood there, side by side, watching the world blur into grey. The rain hit the wooden floor in rhythmic bursts, the scent of wet earth rising between them. When thunder rumbled in the distance, she laughed softly, that low, melodic sound that always seemed to undo him. Without thinking, he took off his jacket and held it out to her. "Here," he said. She glanced at it, then at him, her eyes calm, almost amused. "I've survived worse than a little rain," she said, shaking her head. But she accepted it anyway, draping it loosely over her shoulders. The gesture was small, but it felt intimate, like something quietly sacred. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was full. Full of the things neither of them dared to say. He could hear her breathing, soft and even, as the wind lifted strands of her damp hair. She turned slightly toward him, her expression unreadable. "You're quiet," she said softly. "I'm just trying not to ruin the moment," he replied. Her lips curved, barely. "Smart boy." They both laughed, but it was a fragile laughter, the kind that trembles on the edge of something real. As the rain began to slow, she sighed and slipped the jacket from her shoulders, handing it back. Their fingers brushed, and that brief touch sent a pulse through him, sharp, grounding, alive. "Thank you," she murmured. Then, after a pause, "You should be careful with your kindness. It makes people remember you." Before he could answer, she stepped out into the damp air, her bare feet whispering against the wooden porch. He watched her disappear into the curtain of rain, the sound of her voice, and her warning, echoing softly in his chest. The next time he saw her, everything felt heavier, not in a painful way, but in the way silence gains weight when it's holding too much inside. The rain had passed, days had slipped quietly by, but the memory of that evening clung to him. He didn't know what they were, acquaintances, friends, something undefined, but the space between them had changed. It was another small gathering at his friend's house. A casual dinner, laughter in the kitchen, the scent of roasted garlic and wine drifting through the air. She was there again, wearing a deep green dress that caught the light each time she moved. She looked serene, yet her eyes held that same restrained energy, like a flame under glass. Throughout dinner, they avoided direct conversation, but their awareness of each other was constant. Every time she reached for a glass or turned her head, he felt it, that unspoken pull that made the room feel smaller. Their glances met once, maybe twice, long enough to leave him breathless before she looked away, pretending nothing had happened. After everyone had finished eating, the crowd drifted outside to the backyard, where a few lanterns glowed softly against the night. He stepped out alone, leaning against the fence, trying to collect his thoughts under the hum of crickets. The night was still, warm, and endless. Then her voice came from behind him, calm, quiet, but with the kind of presence that immediately filled the air. "You shouldn't look at me that way," she said. He turned slowly, meeting her gaze. Her tone wasn't cold. It was more like a plea she already knew would go unanswered. "Then stop looking back," he said softly. For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes studied him, as if weighing whether he understood what he was saying. Then, a faint smile tugged at her lips, not playful, but tender. Surrendering, almost. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" she whispered. "Probably not," he admitted. "But I know how it feels." She exhaled, the kind of sigh that carries both longing and regret. The space between them felt fragile, like one more word might break it entirely. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of smoke from the grill, mixed with her perfume, something warm and floral that lingered too long. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. In that quiet, it became clear, whatever this was, it couldn't be explained or undone. It was already there, alive, unspoken, undeniable. It had been days since that quiet confrontation beneath the lanterns, yet neither of them could seem to let the air settle. Every glance, every accidental encounter, carried the same quiet electricity, the kind that made him both restless and afraid of what might come next. Then one evening, Her message appeared. Could you help me move a few boxes? I'll owe you dinner. The tone was casual, almost innocent, but the second he saw her name light up his phone, something inside him stirred. When he arrived at her place, the sun was already setting. The house was warm and filled with the scent of sandalwood and freshly brewed tea. She opened the door barefoot, wearing a loose shirt and soft grey slacks. Nothing meant to impress, yet everything about her did. Thank you for coming, she said, stepping aside to let him in. They're not that heavy, I promise. He smiled, following her through the living room where quiet music played, a slow, soulful tune that seemed to fill every pause. They began working in silence, moving boxes, sorting through small things she hadn't touched in years. She told stories between moments, about old photographs, trips, people she used to know. Her voice carried that gentle wistfulness that made every word feel personal. At one point, she reached for a box at the same time he did. Their hands touched, skin against skin, and neither moved away. The moment hung there, suspended, stretching thin with meaning. He looked up, and she was already looking at him. Her breath caught, just barely. Don't, she whispered. But she didn't move. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of music and the rhythm of their breathing. He could feel his heartbeat echoing in his ears, loud and steady. She closed her eyes for a second, as if fighting a battle only she could see. You don't understand what this could do, she said, voice trembling at the edges. He stepped back, not out of fear, but respect. Maybe I do, he said quietly. Something softened in her gaze, and for a moment, she looked at him not as someone younger, but as someone who saw her, not the polished, self-assured woman she showed the world, but the one who longed for something real. The moment passed as quickly as it came. She turned away, brushing her hair from her face, her composure returning like a mask slipping back into place. Dinner, then, she said gently, pretending nothing had happened. But they both knew, something had. And pretending would only work for so long. Days turned into a quiet ache of absence. Neither reached out, yet both felt the space left behind. He replayed that night over and over, the touch of her hand, the way her voice broke when she said don't. It wasn't rejection, it was restraint. And that, somehow, made it harder to forget. He tried to move on, work, friends, distractions. But even in the noise of the world, she lived in the pauses. The silence after laughter, the stillness before sleep. That's where she lingered. Then one late afternoon, as the sun bled gold across the sky, he found her by the lake. He hadn't planned it, just a walk to clear his head, but there she was, sitting on a bench, her gaze lost in the water's soft shimmer. She looked different, not put together like before. Her hair was loose, her eyes tired, her posture unguarded. When she saw him, she didn't seem surprised. If anything, it was as if she had been waiting. He sat beside her, wordless. The air smelled of rain and pine, the world quiet except for the soft lapping of water against the shore. After a long silence, she said, "You're angry with me." He shook his head. "No, just confused." She gave a faint smile, not amused, but sad. "You shouldn't be. I told you from the beginning no one would believe you." He looked at her then, the question finally escaping. "Why did you say that?" She hesitated, fingers tracing the edge of the bench. "Because people see what they want to see. To them, I'm supposed to be the one who knows better, the composed one, the responsible one. Someone like me doesn't fall for someone like you." Her words caught in her throat. She turned away, blinking hard, her voice softening. "When I said no one would believe you, I didn't mean they wouldn't believe you. I meant they wouldn't believe me. They wouldn't believe I could feel this way again." He didn't speak. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, gently, as if it might vanish if he gripped too tightly. Her skin was warm, her pulse steady beneath his thumb. Neither of them moved for a while. The world felt still, almost reverent, like the moment existed outside of time. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet but unashamed. "You make me remember what it felt like to be alive," she whispered. "And that scares me." He squeezed her hand lightly. No promises, no declarations. Just presence. Just truth. And for the first time, she didn't pull away. The days after the lake were quiet, almost painfully so. Neither of them reached out, though both thought of the other constantly. He replayed every conversation, every glance, every brush of skin against skin, the stolen moments that had shifted the air between them into something fragile and unspoken. And she carried the weight of their connection silently, the way someone might hold a delicate artifact they knew could never be displayed. It was a weekend again, and the same neighborhood, the same familiar streets. He wandered aimlessly, drawn without thinking to the places they had shared, the porch in the rain, the market where their eyes met, the quiet lakeside bench. And then, as if by some quiet fate, he saw her in the distance, walking slowly toward him. She was smiling, that same soft, unreadable smile, gentle but filled with everything they had left unsaid. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The air smelled of fallen leaves and approaching winter, crisp and alive. He stepped closer, his heart beating in a rhythm that seemed both urgent and painfully restrained. "You remembered," he said quietly. "I always remember," she replied, her voice steady but warm, carrying the weight of unspoken emotion. They didn't touch, didn't cross the invisible line that had been drawn between desire and restraint. Instead, they stood facing one another, letting the silence speak. And in that silence, they understood everything. She finally spoke again, her tone tender, deliberate. "We can't be reckless. Not in the way we might want to be. But that doesn't mean we didn't matter to each other." He nodded, feeling a bittersweet ache in his chest. It wasn't the ending he would have chosen, nor the beginning he had hoped for, but it was real. It was truth. It was everything that could exist without shattering either of them. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, letting the memories of stolen touches, whispered words, and lingering glances fill the space. And then she stepped back, her eyes lingering on his as though imprinting a memory that would last a lifetime. "Goodbye," she said softly. He didn't respond. There was nothing to say that could make it easier. Instead, he watched her walk away, her figure bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, each step leaving an imprint on the heart he hadn't known could feel so much. As she disappeared from sight, he realized that some connections don't need closure in the conventional sense. Some are meant to linger, to shape you, to remind you that love, even when unfulfilled, can leave you richer, more aware, more alive. He turned away, carrying her memory with him, not as a wound, but as a quiet, enduring warmth that would always remind him of what it felt like to be truly seen. Ending type. Separation with lasting impact. They cannot be together, but the bond between them leaves a permanent, transformative impression on both lives.